Good evening. I'm Councillor Jane Scullion and I'm leader of Calderdale Council. And thank you for joining us this evening for a 1 hour live question and answer session all about our budget proposals for next year. We're live on the Council's Facebook page and on the YouTube channel. And as I said, it will be about an hour, question answers, an opportunity for you to ask questions about the budget proposals, and there'll be live answers from our panel who are here tonight, who I'll introduce in a moment. I just wanted to say a little bit about how we're actually going to take questions. You can submit questions to the panel by commenting on the live chat on Facebook or on YouTube, and we will pick them up. And we'll aim to answer as many as possible. But obviously, if there are lots of questions on the same subject, we'll try and group them together. If we don't get through them all this evening, then we will still feed them into the consultation. As I said before, this is the consultation budget. There's a set of proposals here for you to look at, to discuss and to comment on. It's not the final budget. So that's why it's important that we have this conversation, this discussion, this consultation. Let me tell you where you will find the full proposals if you haven't had a chance to hear about them yet or read them yourself. And you'll have seen bits in the Courier and online already, perhaps. If you go to calderdale.gov.uk/budget, then that will show you the full set of proposals. And I have a printed document of it here, and you will see that it's a pretty extensive suite of documents. But there are some key things about it that I think are really worth pulling out. What else have I got to say? That there are other ways of taking part in the budget consultation. So if there are people who can't be online tonight, you can write to the council, you can fill in the survey that's online, things like that. You can get in touch with your local councillor. There are copies of the budget in every library, so you can take part in the consultation in many different ways. Let me move on then just to introduce the panel this evening. Myself, Councillor Jane Scullion, leader of Calderdale Council. Councillor Dacre, Sylvia, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Councillor Sylvia Dacre. I'm the Cabinet Member for Resources, which includes Finance, and I'm also Ward Councillor for Todmorden.
Thank you, Sylvia. And Becky, can you introduce yourself?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Becky McIntyre. I'm the Director of Resources and Transformation and also the Council's Chief Finance Officer.
Thank you. And these are difficult times, of course, to be managing or having oversight of a council budget. And I wanted to just say, by way of introduction, that we have actually got a legal responsibility as a council, like all the other councils up and down the country, to set a legal budget. In some parts of the public sector, you can just carry on losses year on year. Health service, for example, that's not the case with local councils. You do have to legally set a budget every year. I think it's by the end of February. The other thing I think it's worth saying by way of introduction is that we have to meet our statutory obligations. And there are quite a wide number of those, but the main statutory responsibilities or obligations we have as a council is to look after children, adults who are vulnerable and who need looking after. And that's what you might hear us refer to our statutory obligations. We are legally obliged to spend money on that. We have no choice. And at the moment, Calderdale Council spends 70% of its budget, 70%. On those statutory obligations, those responsibilities to children and to older people. And so that might include, for example, children with disabilities and special needs, might include early years responsibilities, make sure that children have the best start in life. It might include, I'm very sad to say, sometimes having to take on responsibility for raising a child, financial responsibility for raising a child and looking after it because its parents, his or her parents, for whatever reason, cannot look after that child themselves. And that means that the council has got to step in and take on the costs of raising that child. Now, we're really lucky. We've got some really good foster parents in Calderdale, and big thank you due to those people who take children into their homes and look after them. But we haven't got enough foster parents. So if anybody's watching this and wants to volunteer, please talk to us. But that means if we haven't got foster places for children, then we do actually have to look after them in residential care homes, sometimes specialist care homes if there are particular physical or emotional difficulties. And that costs a lot of money. So those are the kind of costs that you might have under statutory obligations, responsibilities. We also have responsibilities for looking after older people who need additional help, and quite a lot of responsibility, more than perhaps in the past, for looking after adults, young adults and now older adults with learning disabilities. Some years ago, some young people, children with learning disabilities would not actually live for very long. And I'm pleased to say that now many people with disabilities, learning disabilities, physical disabilities live for a very long time. And the council picks up the bill for making sure that those people are able to live a decent life. So that's just some indication of some of the statutory things, just to give you a bit of background in terms of what the council does. So 70% goes on those responsibilities, and the other 30% has to cover everything and covers things like parks, highways, traffic lights, libraries, leisure centres, the whole, dog catching, everything that actually most of us care about. If you haven't got children, a school, relatives with those kind of problems, or older people in your life, you wouldn't know where the 70% of the council's budget went. But we all know about the other 30%. So in terms of developing the budget this year, when it's been particularly difficult, it's been a particularly difficult year. And the the proposals that are here in front of you today, and if you look online, as I said, you just check it again, calderdale.gov.uk/budget, you will see the proposals set out there. They are really, really difficult, unpalatable proposals, looking at the kind of things we might want to cut in order to meet our responsibilities and keep the show on the road. You'll have heard about some councils who actually are, let's not beat about the bush, going bust. Calderdale Council is not in that territory, I'm pleased to say. But as a result of reductions in central government grant over the years, it's really got to the point where it's really hard to carry on just cutting tiny bits of things. It's just unsustainable. So this year, the proposals that we're consulting on actually have some really tough decisions. And one of the reasons for this consultation is to begin to have that conversation with you, the residents in Calderdale, saying, in this difficult situation, if we're to make the books balance, what kind of things actually do we have to contemplate? So I'm just going to look now, and the questions are coming in to me. And the first one, the hardy perennial that matters to all of us really, whether we're driving cars or cycling, when are you going to sort out the potholes? So I think I'm going to come to you first, Councillor Dacre. When is Calderdale Council going to sort out the potholes?
Well, Calderdale Council already does its best to sort out as many potholes as it can. I'm afraid that, as in so many cases, the funding that we get from government to do this is not adequate. It's welcome, but it's not enough. I think it's been estimated recently that it would cost several £billion for all the local authorities across the country to mend all of their potholes. and it would probably take years to catch up the backlog. So we fully recognise the danger that potholes can present, particularly to cyclists like me, who actually their lives can be put at risk by a pothole that's full of water that you don't see in the dark, for instance, or even in the daylight. But also risk to cars can get damaged. There could be minor accidents because of it. So we fully recognise this, and we're constantly seeking to try and make our location of potholes and the methods of mending them more effective. But I'm afraid it's another of those areas where the funds available do not match up to the task, and it is a nationwide problem, and there is a limit to what can be done by council efficiencies.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Dacre. I have to say that in Calderdale it's been a particular problem, and that's because we have got a lot of roads. We've got a lot of A roads, but we have got a lot of B roads and unclassified roads. And I think we're in the north of England, and we know what winter is like and what the ice and snow is like, and indeed the amount of surface water that we have on our roads. I think we've got a very tough job in terms of keeping the roads up. And I would actually like to see government, excuse me, give more attention to areas that are frequently flooded or that are, colder, have more roads that are above sea level, because our roads do take a beating in the winter. The other thing, of course, and it's raised time and time again, particularly those who are on the A646 and those who are on the roads that come in from the motorway, particularly people in the Ryburn Valley, Ripponden Way. Of course, when the M62 is diverted through those, even when it's not an official diversion, people choose to take those roads. And of course, our roads get a lot of hard wear and tear. As Councillor Dacre says, constantly looking at ways of moving on from just what the engineers and road menders called whack and pack, and looking at ways of trying to make those patches better and trying to resurface where things get too bad. But again, that costs money, and the money available for roads has gone down and down over the years. So still trying, really still trying. So important to all of us, that. So but thank you very much for that question. Let's keep seeing what we can do. I'm going to move on to next question I've got here. Important question, and people will have seen the publicity in the SHE, and as councillors we've had quite a lot of mail in our mailboxes, things in the courier about the SHE, things in the mailboxes, discussions in the streets and in the pubs. People really want to know, and the question says, are you following due diligence protocol regarding the supposed sale of the SHE? I don't think I have to explain to anybody watching what the SHE is, but Councillor Dacre, I wonder if you could just pick this one up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And can I just say also for people watching, if you have questions, can you please add them to the chat for us to consider? So in terms of the SHE, obviously it's the home of both the professional football club and the professional rugby league club. And we as a council want those two clubs to survive and flourish. And they both had quite successful seasons in many ways last year. However, the primary business of a council is not really in running sports stadia for professional sports clubs. And so, and in our difficult financial circumstances, we've taken the decision to investigate alternatives for ownership. And our preferred option and our hope is that both the clubs will be able to work together to take over the running of the stadium themselves. That has potential advantages for them, as they may have access to funds that we don't, and it also gives them, between them, freedom to to run things as they want. And both clubs have been approached about the proposal. They both responded positively and agreed to work with the council to see if we can achieve that preferred option. There's an awful lot of work to be done, and I'm sure everybody will understand that neither ourselves nor the clubs want to keep up a public running commentary on those negotiations, because they're clearly quite delicate, and there's commercial aspects of commercial confidentiality there. So I think there's a lot to happen in this process. And as I say, I'd like to reassure people that we are not simply looking to sell the land to the highest bidder. That is not our intention at all. We really want to find a way for the two clubs to coexist and, if possible, make a really good go of running the stadium together. And again, I'd just like to say that I am a rugby league supporter, not of Halifax, but of a club that went through terrible trauma, losing its ground for a number of years before another one was built. And so I do understand how upsetting it can be for fans while all this goes on, and while you can feel very powerless. But I would just ask that you are patient and that you support your clubs in their approach that they have at the moment to trying to work with the council to get a successful resolution to this.
That's really helpful, Councillor Dacre, and I didn't know you were a supporter of a club in another town. I'm a bit shocked by that. I think you should possibly consider your allegiances there. Let me move on. There's an interest in question, and I'm going to come to you, Becky McIntyre. I just want to ask about waste, because it's something that always attracts a lot of interest. And there's a couple of things within the proposals that I think people are particularly interested in. One is the potential closure of the Elland Household Waste Recycling Centre, which of course is near Soby Bridge and near Brighouse. And the other is the introduction of a permit scheme to use household waste centres. And I think that possibly people might really need a bit more explanation of that, in terms of why would you need a permit scheme in Calderdale? And I think there is a possibility that perhaps people from some other neighbouring boroughs may be interested in nipping over the boundary and depositing their waste in Calderdale's household waste centres. Why does this matter? What do we have to pay money out for the eventual disposal of the waste? Becky?
Thank you, Councillor Scullion. Yeah, and going back to your earlier comment around our statutory duties, and waste collection and safe disposal is another fairly significant statutory duty. So, but we need to make sure that we are doing it in the most effective and economical and efficient way. So the amount of waste that we collect, both through our household waste, general waste and recycling, and from our household recycling centres, does need disposing of, which comes at a cost to the council. And the permit scheme, in terms of making sure that only Calderdale residents are using our household recycling centres, to minimise the cost burden on the council for its own residents and its own taxpayers. So in terms of looking at what our residents, council taxpayers contribute to, then it's making sure that they, is wholly benefit of Calderdale residents. So that the permit scheme would be to ensure that we can have a check of proof of residence for those household recycling centres, to try and minimise the cost on our disposal.
Thank you. And if that proposal was to be adopted, Would it be widely advertised? Would people have a reasonable run-in period in terms of knowing what kind of information you could bring just to show that you were a
Yes,
resident of?
yes. If that proposal is adopted and approved, then there will be a wide-reaching communication to help residents know how they can get the permit and get their residency validated for when they do attend our household recycling centres.
Thank you. And I heard, I might have got the figure slightly wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, that it costs about £100 or over £100 per tonne of waste that finally ends up in landfill. And I know we're very good at recycling, Calderdale. In fact, we're extremely good at recycling. So thank you to all of those people who do that sorting and putting out of their recycled bits of waste. But I think anything that can't be recycled has to go into basically landfill, a big hole in the ground. And I think it's about £100 a tonne was the last figure I heard. And I see you, Becky, looking through your papers. It doesn't matter if you haven't got that figure to hand, but we do know that if you don't recycle, it costs the council money that otherwise could be spent on other things. Sylvia, Councillor Dacre, I'm going to come to you to ask you next about an issue that is dear to everybody's hearts at the time of year that's just gone past, in terms of the question in the proposals of should the council be spending money on Christmas trees and festive lighting at the same time as it has all these other draws on its finances, like domestic violence or vulnerable children who are at risk of violence, those sort of. Should the council be spending money on Christmas trees and festive lighting? And if the proposal is adopted that it should perhaps not do this anymore, are there other ways in which communities can actually brighten up that really bleak period of winter? Sylvia, Councillor Dacre.
Thank you. Well, I think that question really goes to the heart of where we are at when we are looking at this consultation budget, in that we have had to put our statutory duties first, and discretionary spend on things like Christmas lights and Christmas trees has really had to be sacrificed in order to enable us to concentrate on those statutory duties as best we can. However, we do recognise that people do need some joy in their lives, and just unrelenting gloom doesn't do anybody any good. And what we will be doing is working with parish and town councils where they exist to see if they can take over some of those costs, or other community groups who might be able to do so. So in relation to the lights, the expenses relate to the actual erection of the lights and then taking them down again at the end of the season, and also to the electricity that is used, that's taken effectively from the lighting system that they're attached to. So it may be possible that some parish and town councils are going to be able to pay themselves for the contractors, and then also effectively refund Calderdale for the electricity. And we'd certainly be looking at, and I mentioned this at the recent parish and town council liaison meeting, would be very keen to work with people to see if arrangements like that can be made. And it's also, in a sense, I gather that there are some towns that do not get a Christmas tree from us. So in some ways, everybody will be treated the same when none of you get a Christmas tree if this proposal goes ahead. I suppose what I'd just say is, because it says Christmas lights, but most of the Christmas lights are already in existence. It's not a question of having to buy them, it's just a question of putting them up and paying for the electricity.
Thank you. Well, interesting to see what comes out in the final proposals, and I gather that discussions are already being held with communities with the business improvement districts where those exist, and indeed with town and parish councils. So it may be that we do see a bit of light and joy in the depths of midwinter, after all. Can I just ask you, Councillor Dacre or Becky, I'm not quite sure which of you, just that there is also one issue which I think perhaps isn't as clear in the papers, the budget consultation papers, as it might be, and I think has been misinterpreted, and various people have raised this, and that's to do with the provision of, let me get this right, housing for young people leaving care, and proposals around that. Now, I know that the words invest to save have been used in relation to this proposal, but I wonder if either of you could just throw some light on, because a number of people have been unhappy in terms of saying, what precisely does this mean, and is this going to be detrimental to children leaving care?
I can answer that. Happy to do so.
Thank you.
So, this is a proposal that I think one thing it does is demonstrate that the staff at Calderdale are doing everything to try to maintain services where they possibly can by new and imaginative routes. So the Children and Young People Directorate has discovered that in Doncaster there's a scheme whereby the council team up with a housing association. The housing association provide homes for our care experienced young people who are maybe having to leave a care home or a foster carer at 16, and we still have a duty to accommodate them between 16 and 18. And at the moment, we do that by private arrangements, which can be extremely costly. So in Doncaster, the Housing Association provides the house, and two young people share it, and they get intensive support, and it's all registered and quality assessed both by the council and by external agencies. And it's a way of helping those young people transition to independence. And the idea is that when they get to 18, they will be able to stand on their own 2 feet much more and go and look and find their own private rented accommodation without the same degree of support. And if maybe they're not quite ready, they'll be able to stop for a bit longer. Now, the proposal at the moment is for 8 young people within 2 years to be housed in homes and 2-bed homes. But I think that should it be successful, and should Together Housing, who are the partner, be able to help continue to provide the homes, really the sky's the limit with it. We can carry on, and if we can find the staff, we can carry on increasing that. And not only will it provide a better, more controlled, safer, better standard of accommodation for the young people, but it will at the same time save us money. So as I've said to somebody who's written to me about this, I just think this is an amazing project. It shows the value of looking for other ideas, the immense value of partnership working, and it should have really, I hope, inspirational results for our young people.
Thank you. That sounds good. That sounds very good. And we like to hear about things that are actually investor safe, that will save us money, because it does give us some headroom in terms of some of the proposals that there are in this difficult budget for cuts. I just wanted to come back very briefly to try and clear up some confusion that is emerged from the questions that are coming in about the permit scheme. A couple of people have asked about the permit scheme, saying, haven't we got one already in Calderdale? And the answer is, of course, we have, in terms of particular types of waste disposal, contractors, etc. The permit scheme, just for clarification, that's being discussed in these budget proposals, is one which basically requires people to show something to show that they're a resident in order to leave their waste at our waste transfer stations or tips. We are close to all of our neighbours, Rochdale, Bradford, Huddersfield, various other places nearby. And we want to make sure that people aren't just popping over the boundary and dropping their waste into the council's own tips, the council's own waste transfer station. Because as we indicated earlier, as you might have heard, each time we put the waste into landfill, it costs the council money. People should be disposing of their waste within their own council, and the cost then can be properly calculated. So it's a permit scheme in relation to that, not the existing permit scheme that people have rightly pointed out already existed. There is a follow-up question in terms, I think Councillor Dacre has already covered, to do with what happens if the clubs, football clubs or rugby clubs can't afford to run the Shay, and that's not a situation where we want to be in. We will try every avenue that we possibly can, and let's actually take each stage as it comes rather than speculate about the worst possible case. Let me take another question. Will the council review its model so that it is not as reliant on government funding in the future? Are there new opportunities to commercialise? Councillor Dacre, would you like to have a go at that first?
Okay. Yes, thank you. So, obviously, one of the reasons that councils across the country are finding themselves in such difficulties is that the government over the last 13 or so years has deliberately sought to reduce the amount of central funding to us and expects us to make that up by increasing council tax, business rates, fees and charges. And that has a very different impact on you depending on what part of the country you're in. So we have, for instance, a low council tax base in the sense that the majority of our houses are band A and band B. That's the bottom, the lowest band. And so when we raise council tax, we raise far less than a council which is in the south of England and has much higher land values and therefore far more bigger houses with higher bands. So it's difficult for us to increase our income substantially by council tax in the way that some others can do. And it's the same in a way with business rates, in that if you are, say, a city and you have lots of commercial premises in the middle of your city, then your business rate take is going to be much higher than Calderdale's. Calderdale, many of our businesses are small, micro businesses even, and they may even be exempt from business rates, although we will get compensation from the government from that. But there's still a limit to what we can do to increase that business rate base. We can, of course, increase fees and charges, and in the budget it does indicate that we are going to be looking at fees and charges across the board. But of course, that's not popular. People don't like it when fees and charges go up. And there are also issues about fairness, depending on what it is you're charging for. You have to think about, does the council want to subsidise this? Because actually we want people to be able to come and we don't want to price people out of it. Or do we... So it just depends. How much we wish to recover of the cost of a service will depend upon that service. So we also do constantly think about commercial opportunities, but we have to be very careful about this because it is not the primary function of a council to be a commercial body. So we have to concentrate on our core functions, which is to provide those statutory services that you've heard about and all of the other public services that you will often think about, like the waste, like the parks, like the libraries. and so on. So we have not to get distracted from what our core purpose is. We are also not allowed to do more than what's called effectively full cost recovery when we charge for most things, so that we can't just make a profit unless we set up separate companies in order to do that. And in Calderdale, the opportunities for such companies are really not there, not in the way that they are in some more prosperous boroughs with high land values, for instance. So we're open to suggestions always about commercialisation, and members of staff are encouraged to come forward with any ideas that they have, and councillors will often raise ideas. Unfortunately, very often when ideas that seem like they could be a money spinner are actually investigated, it turns out that actually they'd cost as much to implement as we would gain from doing them, or they have other unexpected and unintended consequences, and they're not actually such a good idea as they at first appear. So please rest assured that, and the other thing I would say is that in one sense, there's more, the other aspect to think about is that the council tries to be businesslike. That means that we try to make sure we understand how much it's costing us to do things, and that we make sure we keep the costs of doing the things that we are doing to a minimum. And so in that sense, we want to be businesslike as well as adopt commercial opportunities where they're appropriate and actually profitable for us to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Dacre. The question that is on many people's lips is, where are our leisure facilities? There's been no start on these projects, and I assume that that's a reference to the Halifax Leisure Centre. And if you have had a chance to read those proposals, and I'll just mention again that the council's budget proposals, or the cabinet's budget proposals, they have not yet gone to council, are at calderdale.gov.uk/budget, or copies can be found in the library, in all the libraries, and you can take a look. I think the screen can actually see it, but I think the URL, as they call it, the address is on the screen, or you can simply ask Customer First, or indeed any of your councillors, and they will get you a copy of that. Take a look at that, put your comments in on the budget proposals that are in front of you. But one of the things that isn't in there, that was discussed by the council's cabinet, is should we halt going ahead with the Halifax Leisure Centre, which, as you know, had already been put on pause when galloping inflation, construction inflation, just absolutely ran away with the costs of the project. And council officers have been working way behind the scenes, talking to civil servants about how we can still get external money in to develop this, and basically going back to the drawing board a bit and saying, okay, that scheme became unaffordable because of galloping inflation, and we weren't prepared to write a blank cheque for the residents of Calderdale as a whole for the leisure centre in Halifax. But we've gone back to the drawing board a bit, looked at what's nice to have, but what's really absolutely essential is still make a fantastic, really fantastic new leisure facility. We did seriously consider whether we should actually just cut that out. It would save quite a lot of money. And we decided against that. I mean, partly is you can't cancel something twice. And actually, Halifax and Calderdale as a whole really, really does deserve a state-of-the-art leisure centre. Good for health, good for children, and we're surrounded, goodness knows we're surrounded by rivers and canals, dams, reservoirs and so on. It's really important that our children in particular are able to swim but also the older people feel they can exercise, people recovering from operations, all kinds of reasons why that is a good idea. And we have actually managed to pull together a reduced cost, but still fantastic plans for a leisure centre. And this year we'll see those things, I was going to say become concrete. That sounds as though it's becoming concrete, but getting underway. And you will see a lot of media. We decided it was actually short-sighted and lacked ambition, really, to pull that in terms of cuts, and we have looked in other areas. If you think that it should be cut, then put your views, put your comments into those proposals. But the proposals in front of you at the moment are to go steam ahead with the leisure centre in Halifax. There's a question which has come in, rather a technical question, and I'll deal with that one, which is, why are you looking to implement the Boundary Commission, where we will have an increase in the number of councillors who will have an impact on council spending? Just to say that the Boundary Commission has not ruled on what its proposals for Calderdale are likely to be. It will come out. It's asked for comments on its current proposals, and we will see what they come out with. I'm not entirely sure when. I think its final proposals would be later this year and will take effect in 2026, actually. So probably just after the period of this current budget process, which is looking at the next 2 to 3 years. Can I just look at another question, which is, again, a bit of a technical one. You are a well-informed lot, you residents of Calderdale, aren't you? And that is about, and I don't know if Councillor Dacre or Becky, you can pick this up, regarding the bus lane enforcement, which is one of the proposals in front of you in the Cabinet budget proposals. How has the projected income been calculated? Councillor Dacre or Becky, can either of you throw any light on that, or is it a bit too technical?
I think because it's something that we're exploring, and it was in, I think the income was in year 3 of the proposals. It was estimated based on what other peer authorities have been doing. And so it was sort of indicative of what that might happen. But the team will be going through all of the necessary processes to put that in place before it would come into force. But yes, it was an estimate based on what colleagues had gathered from other similar authorities.
Can I also just come in on that? Say that one of the good things about that, if you like, is that it's possible to bid for money from West Yorkshire for the money to implement. So we don't have to bear all of the cost of that ourselves. And also, it's not entirely a money-making measure in a way, that, because actually we do hope and anticipate that violations will go down when enforcement starts. Because actually what we want is for people not to commit the traffic offences and not to drive in the bus lanes when they shouldn't be doing.
Thank you. We all need to be better at thinking about our speeds in some of the residential areas, and certainly as council we're very committed to Vision Zero and trying to make sure that there are no traffic accidents in our borough. There've been a number more questions, detailed questions about the cost and the subsidy for running the SHEA, and I should perhaps just say at this point that there is a excuse me, this consultation session is being recorded and will be available for replay, I think, on the YouTube channel. So if you missed the earlier things that were said about the SHEA and the council's commitment to finding finding a good resolution to the issue of the Shay and the football and the rugby club, and a sound future, you can take a look back at that. But as I say, some detailed questions about precisely the subsidy. Councillor Dacre, you want to come in there?
Well, there was one question about the piece about the Shay, which I haven't really addressed, which was in comparing it to the Peace Hall, and I think it might be worth my just commenting on that one. The question said the council appreciates the value the Peace Hall brings to the local economy, but does the council see the Shay as a drain on the public purse? And I suppose, of course, we did hand over the Peace Hall to an independent trust, precisely because we didn't feel that we as a council were best placed to make the most of it. We couldn't access some of the grants that the trust can. And again, we are not experts in running visitor destinations necessarily, and it's a very big undertaking. And yes, we do see money that has been given to the Peace Hall as an investment, and I think many of the businesses in Halifax would recognise the enormous value that events at the Peace Hall in particular can bring to the town of Halifax. And sadly, I think that the footfall there is probably rather higher than the combined footfall of the football and the rugby league clubs combined. And I have never been anywhere else in the country where somebody has said to me, "Oh, Halifax, oh, that's where the Peace Hall is. That's one on my bucket list to visit." Nobody, I'm afraid, has ever said that to me about the Shay. And so whilst we may value them both, I think the national and international profile that the Peace Hall gives the borough and the benefits that brings in terms of income to businesses in Halifax is enormous, and we have to do our best to try to ensure that the Peace Hall can carry on. But as I say, we also do hope and are doing everything we can to ensure that the Shay carries on as well.
Thank you, Councillor Dacre. I think you underestimate the sheer love that people have for their clubs and that venue of the Shay. And I know when I lived in other places many decades ago, how much when your football or rugby team are successful, it lifts the whole town, it lifts everything, people's pride in their clubs and in their borough. And I think it really is an absolute job. I do take your points about the Peace Hall, but I think we mustn't underestimate the sheer love really people have for the Shay, and we absolutely, as a council, we absolutely honour that. It's interesting to hear the other day that one of the stands originally was at Manchester City, but that's another part of the extraordinary heritage of Calderdale. I've got a question coming here, which is a very perceptive question, and I'm interested in, Becky, in your answer to it, which is, are we likely to see a 5% council tax increase every year if you're now more reliant on that source of funding? Becky?
Yes, it's an interesting question, and I guess just to point out that the 5% is a limit currently set by the government as part of the local government finance settlement. So although the council makes the final determination on council tax levels, it is guided by the policy set by local government. So currently, there's a referendum limit. So all councils can increase council tax by up to 5%. So that's 2.99% on general rate and 2% on adult social care precept without holding a referendum. Should a council wish to increase it more than that, and like we've said, as the council is more reliant on income from council tax and business rates and locally sourced income, that could be a possibility. I'm not sure of any councils that have actually gone through with a referendum to increase council tax, but it is set by, that limit is set by national government. So in terms of what might happen in future years, we haven't yet got any information in future years settlement beyond 24-25. So we're not sure what the referendum limit will be set by national government in the future. So it could be less and it could be more. However, also just to note that some councils that are in financial difficulty, the government have allowed their council tax limit to be set at a much higher rate to help those councils balance their budget. So for some councils, they're able to increase their council tax up to about 10%. So there is exceptions to the rule, but so as a general rule, we're making the assumption that the current 5% referendum limit will continue, and that's what we've used in our assumptions for our 3-year budget plan. But that is a council decision each year, taken in February.
Thank you, Becky. The council have put forward, or the cabinet have put forward, on behalf of Calderdale Council, a set of budget proposals, which is what we're having a conversation about tonight. And it's for 3 years. The settlement from government, as I understand it, is only 1 year. So what you're saying is the next 2 years we're making the assumption that everything stays as is, really. Certainly one of the things I would like to see is for central government to give us 3 years, in terms of, then you know where you are for 3 years, like planning your own money, in terms of, okay, this is what we've got, this is the 70% we've got to spend on children and young peoples, and this is the 30% that we have to spend on libraries and potholes and leisure centres and traffic lights and dog catching and parks and cemeteries and everything else, that all the extraordinary functions that a council does. But we only know each year how much we're going to get in that settlement bit, and we don't know until, I think it's something like the 18th of December each year, ready for the beginning of May. So it's tough really to do that. And the proposals in front of you in terms of the projected cuts, and I think I said right at the beginning, and I'm sorry if you've come in late and you missed some of those things, the projected cuts this year are the worst cuts, completely unpalatable. That's not what you come into local government is to cut services and make things worse. You want to really try and make things better. But this is a set of proposals which tries to make the books balance and meet those statutory obligations, those responsibilities to vulnerable adults, older people, and children's services. I think perhaps it's worth saying something else in terms of it's come up in one or two of the questions about money from the combined authority, West Yorkshire Combined Authority. The mayor is Tracy Braben, where the 5 councils have got together, and there's an elected West Yorkshire mayor, Tracy Braben, and we have for a very long time, as 5 West Yorkshire councils, put money in to West Yorkshire level in terms of transport, things like concessionary fares for older people and students, those kind of things. Now, Calderdale largely has done extremely well out of that money at the West Yorkshire level. And I wanted to say something, because people do actually say, it's not actually a question here specifically, but people often say in the street, I don't understand why you can do the nice things, the Year of Culture, whatever, at the same time as you're having to make cuts. And one of the answers is that we have actually been extremely successful in applying for these one-off pots of money that are absolutely rigidly ring-fenced to only spending on this and pulling them into Calderdale. And that means that we've had money for tourism. Obviously, we've got money in from filming, things like that. And we basically have to make sure that we carry on doing that. And people say, but why spend any money on culture? Or why spend any money on leisure? We think it's important really for people's mental health and actually just for enjoyment in terms of not living miserably, but perhaps more importantly, we know that there are jobs and there's tourism. It brings people into the borough when you have things happening in the borough, whether that's a football match, a rugby match, or indeed something, a concert on at the Peace Hall. And those people who come into the borough spend money. And our children see that actually there are interesting jobs and futures to be had, sound engineers, lighting engineers, as well as acting and all of the things that go with that whole film, TV, entertainment and hospitality world. And I think we've done extremely well in bringing in some of that external money from the Arts Council, from West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and from lots of other sources as well. The West Yorkshire money, somebody made the comment that it was simply council's own money. Actually, it isn't, because we got a West Yorkshire Combined Authority. The government said, if you do that, we will give you some money. It's called gain share money. We will give you extra money to spend on particular projects. And so it isn't just the money that we as councils have always put in for the travel and transport activities. It's much wider than that. And we're pretty good in Calderdale at trying to get some of that money in. So the picture isn't all gloom and doom, really. It's tough. We're working hard to run it well, balance the books well, and make some difficult decisions. And the conversation with you online tonight has helped to make some of those decisions and will help inform us when we come to the final Budget Council later this month. Let me just mention two things again. I'm conscious of the time. I can't see any new questions. I'm sorry if some of the more detailed technical questions haven't been answered, but they will be put into the budget consultation process. Let me mention again that this conversation has been recorded and will be available for replay. And you'll see details of the budget consultation online address on the screen. You can also look at the budget consultation papers in any library, or ask your local councillor if you know who your councillor is, and indeed make comments online through Customer First, or indeed write us at the Town Hall in Halifax, and it will get to us. And all of those will be put together and put into that budget consultation paper. We do want to hear from you, strongly encourage you to take part in this conversation about our budget. I'm conscious of the time. I think I'm going to say thank you to people who've watched and who've joined us at the beginning or halfway through. Thank you for your questions. We've really appreciated that. Thank you to Councillor Sylvia Dacre, the Cabinet Member for Resources. And thank you to Becky McIntyre, our Director of Transformation and Resources. And thank you for the technical people behind the scenes who've helped to make this happen. And enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much. Good night.